Okay. All right. So thanks to each one of you who's taken the time to join us at this late in the day. Much appreciation to all of you. So today we're convening this town hall, a joint town hall. So it's the US Carbon Cycle Science Program, the North American Carbon Program, and the Ocean Carbon and Biogeochemistry Program. So on behalf of all of us, sincere thanks for joining us. And the topic today is launching a new decade of carbon cycle science. We'll present a few slides, and at the end, there'll be plenty of time to ask questions and also to provide feedback and suggestions to us. We're also joined, so I'm Gami Shrestha. I'm the director of the US Carbon Cycle Science Program Office. Livy Larson is here. She's in person in New Orleans. She's the coordinator of the North American Carbon Program. And Heather Benway could not join us today, but she extends her apologies. Heather Benway is the executive officer of the Ocean Carbon and Biogeochemistry Program. We also have Monica Kopacz, who is the program manager of the NOAA AC4 division, and also a member of the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group, which I'll talk about briefly. All right, so let's start with an introduction about the US Carbon Cycle Science Program. We facilitate carbon cycle science research and provide national leadership on carbon cycle science priorities. We established in the early 2000s. The carbon program itself was established in 1999 by the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group under the auspices of the US Global Change Research Program. A few years after that, we established the North American Carbon Program and the Ocean Carbon and Biogeochemistry Program as our major community building and community-led activities that foster innovation and cultivate new research areas. Right, so the mission of the US Carbon Cycle Science Program and the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group is to coordinate and facilitate federally funded carbon cycle research and provide leadership to the US Global Change Research Program on carbon cycle science priorities. We support the implementation of the 1990 Global Change Research Act to understand, assess, predict, and respond to human-induced and natural processes of global change. We work closely with both the North American Carbon Program and the Ocean Carbon and Biogeochemistry Program, which we'll talk about later. Recently, we launched the Interagency Carbon Dioxide Research Coordination Workstream to explore, advance, and inform interagency coordination strategies. We also recently approved the establishment of the Interagency Greenhouse Gas Information Monitoring and Analysis Workstream. Furthermore, we recently developed a new leadership award for students and early career or underrepresented and marginalized identities and communities in our interagency space. And if you're interested or know someone who might be interested to apply for that, please take a look at our website, carboncyclescience.us. We're accepting applications on a rolling basis through April. In order to drive the program's mission forward, the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group meets frequently, at least every 4 weeks, and often weekly or bi-weekly. With team members from 14 US agencies and departments, we represent a multidisciplinary portfolio of federal research and science funding on carbon cycle across land, ocean, atmosphere, society, and pertinent interfaces. This slide and figure represent an overview of the proposed framework of activities of the newly approved workstream on interagency greenhouse gas information, analysis, and monitoring. We convened a town hall on this topic last week on Thursday. So please take a look at the recording if you're interested to learn more about that. And also feel free to reach out to any of us, including the leads or the main points of contact for this activity. And there are Ben Porter, Lori Breuweiler, and Aline Andrews, and myself. This slide illustrates the timeline for related historical interagency efforts that directly or indirectly led the groundwork for the interagency CBR research strategy coordination that we recently initiated. Last year, we had asked ourselves, how do we start developing multi-agency research agendas that can leverage what we know so far about the carbon cycle and begin to develop new opportunities that will inform future carbon dioxide removal strategies. These activities bring us steps closer to that vision. In December 2020, we launched the first federal CDR data call aimed at developing the first federal CDR research compendium, which encompasses federally funded research, including observations and management activities pertinent to studying, informing, or evaluating CDR. Based on the enthusiastic response to the data call, we are now in the process of finalizing the first interagency interactive CDR research compendium. This tool highlights federal efforts to advance CDR science, informing actions that respond to climate change, and provides a platform for the analysis of gaps and opportunities in federally funded CDR research. Here is a screenshot of this interface. We are also working on a perspective article on this. The goals of this activity are to support and advance a whole of government approach for coordination and collaboration in CDR research and science to inform emerging CDR practices, technologies, and strategies. And go to raise awareness of decades of US government-funded research, observations, models, tools, and mechanisms that could inform emerging CDR conversations, priorities, and strategies across the US government, the US Global Change Research Program, all our partners and stakeholders. For those of you who missed it, please see the recording of my talk on this activity. The session was today, so the recording should be available in a couple of days at least. Okay, so the past informs the future, and we keep learning from it. And as a coordinated research, multi-agency research program, we learn from all the agencies and from all our scientists who are part of the different research activities funded by the agencies. So much of the last decade's progress was assessed in the latest USCSP Sustained Climate Assessment product, the second state of the carbon cycle report, which some of you were involved in, and that's much appreciated. We led that with 200 scientists across North America. And we are now in the process of preparing the foundation to develop the next decadal US carbon cycle science plan. There is also a new USCCSP strategic plan that's in the works. So we'll be looking at that plan as well as new Biden-Harris administration and congressional priorities, which will serve as important guideposts for our interagency coordination. So what do we need to think about in terms of interagency or multi-agency carbon research? Would love to hear from you. We are working on the groundwork for some strategic initiatives, including your feedback would be very valuable and very useful for everyone involved. Thank you. Please contact me directly at gstressa@usccrp.gov if you have questions, ideas, suggestions, or thoughts on collaboration opportunities. I will yield to Libby now. First, I'd like to quote the White House OCB Director's call to action delivered to the AGU audience yesterday. The world needs ferocious innovation and deployment. And he was talking about carbon dioxide removal strategies and other opportunities for research, such as improving greenhouse gas measurements. And I will leave you with a question also, similar to interagency, other interagency teams under the auspices of the US Global Change Research Program. We support the implementation of the 1990 Global Change Research Act to understand, assess, predict, and respond to human-induced and natural processes of global change. How can we do that? How can we do that better? That's a question for all of you. Bibi, passing the slide to you now.
Very much, Gami. So I am the coordinator for the North American Carbon Program, or NACP, as Gami mentioned. And NACP is a multi-agency and multidisciplinary scientific research program, or really more accurately at this point, a community of practice. So researchers at a variety of different institutions that are all focused on carbon sources, sinks, and fluxes in North America and adjacent oceans. We are a primary activity of the U.S. Carbon Cycle Science Program. We currently have about 2,600 participants who are in our database, and they span the range of really looking at using observational, experimental, and modeling efforts to look at the terrestrial, oceanic, atmospheric, and human components of the carbon cycle. Next slide. So we are guided by some science questions that have recently been refined in our new implementation plan. And these questions are ones that the community of researchers have really sort of honed in on as being especially important. But that community of researchers engages with these scientific questions, I think, in part of the reason that Gami and I work very closely is because we do this in dialogue with the research interests and needs of the US federal government as well. So the main questions are, how do natural processes and human actions affect the carbon cycle on land, atmosphere, and the oceans? How do policy and management decisions affect the levels of the primary carbon-containing gases? And how are ecosystem species, natural resources impacted by increasing greenhouse gas concentrations and all the associated changes that we see in climate by the management decisions that are being made or not being made, for example. Next slide. So within the implementation plan for NACP, the community has really identified some core program elements under which sort of different interest groups have organized. And one of the things that I think is especially important is that these are not organized around type of ecosystem or species of carbon gas that you're looking at, but rather around these, what I feel are more integrative elements. So we have, expressed the need and implementation ideas around the fact that we really need to have sustained and expanded observations of carbon stocks and fluxes across all of these different areas. That continues to be a vital piece of a vital element for NACP. We also need to really be addressing assessing and integrations. So understanding the activities, for synthesizing from our observations and bridging across the scales and disciplines to be able to really enhance and deepen our understanding. Next slide. Then based on, in part on those integration and syntheses, we really are focused on doing studies and work that addresses the ideas of understanding processes and being to attribute different changes to stocks and fluxes to specific activities and processes that are happening. And then once we have an understanding of those processes and attribution, to be able to predict into the future how different changes are going to affect the carbon cycle moving forward, both thinking about that with respect to existing sort of trajectories of climate change, but also being able to test predictions of what will happen with particular management decisions that might occur. And next slide. And then finally, a key component is then the communication, outreach, and decision support that results from this and is a vital component of this generation of new scientific understanding and knowledge. And that the community feels very strongly that we want to be part of the production of responses to climate change and the science that supports the decision-making that happens across a range of different scales. So everything from the local and regional and state level all the way up to US or even continental interests and questions that need to be addressed looking to the future. Next slide. So within the coming decade, as I mentioned, Gammy and I work very closely together. People, I think, often aren't quite sure about why there's a US carbon cycle science program and the North American carbon program. And so we do work very jointly on things. And I think part of the connection for NACP is that we are the community of researchers and the network that exists there to be able to respond to and support and enhance the work and interests of the US Carbon Cycle Science Program. So as Gammy mentioned, there's really a lot of exciting activity around carbon dioxide removal and also greenhouse gas monitoring and figuring out what an operational carbon monitoring system for the US and but also across different scales will look like if we want to assess whether or not different policies are having an impact. We really need to be able to monitor the changes that are happening. And all of this is really embedded in and integrated with our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and justice, both within the sort of academia and scientific enterprise, but also within the work that we do and how it may serve, what communities are we serving in ways that we can really enhance activities for environmental and climate justice. And in part along those lines, one of the things that we have been working on more now is expanding our international coordination and collaboration. So we have been working with colleagues in the Mexican Carbon Program and working also with Canadians and thinking about ways to develop they're sort of reconstituting. For example, there was an organization called CarboNA that was focused on that trilateral work and collaboration. And so there's interest in getting that started again. So we hope that with all of these different components that we can really look forward to a pretty exciting future and activity of being able to undertake these activities. And I think that might be my last slide, except for the next slide, Gammy. Yes. So please feel free to contact me if you have any questions or would like to get involved. And you can follow me on Twitter, and there's our website as well. And back to you, Gammy, for OCB.
Thanks, Libby. So if anyone's not talking, please mute your microphones. And I see that we have some more program managers who joined us. We have Julie Petridge from NSF, and Robin Smythe from NSF. I think I saw Caroline Olson shortly, but she must have left. So they're all also members of the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group. All right, so since Heather Benway cannot be here, I'll speak briefly about the slides that she sent. The Ocean Carbon and Biogeochemistry program, or OCB, was established by NSF, NASA, and NOAA in 2006 as a major activity of the US Carbon Cycle Science Program. OCB is a network of scientists working across multiple disciplines to understand the ocean's role in the carbon cycle and how marine ecosystems and biogeochemical cycles are responding to environmental change. NSF and NASA provide support for the OCB Project Office, which is based at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. The OCB Office supports its network in many ways, including communication, science planning, education capacity building, and sponsoring, as well as coordinating community workshops, working groups, and training activities. High-level OCB science focus areas are highlighted here by the green icons. Please visit the OCB website or find them on social media to learn more about the activities. OCB is a bottom-up program, meaning that the leadership and activities of OCB are shaped by its community through an open process, including annual activity proposal solicitations and open nominations for the OCB Scientific Steering Committee. Over the past couple of years, high-level discussions of carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, approaches have grown in frequency and urgency, particularly in response to the most recent IPCC report, which made clear that in addition to drastically reducing carbon emissions, we need to remove and sequester carbon from the atmosphere in order to limit warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius and stabilize climate. This will likely require a broad portfolio of terrestrial and ocean CDR approaches. It is imperative that the scientific community steps up to engage in research on CDR methods and technologies. With expertise in marine inorganic carbon chemistry, air, sea, CO2 carbon dioxide exchange, ocean carbon cycling and storage, and the biological pump, the OCB community is well poised to conduct research to inform the efficacy and potential ecological consequences of ocean CDR techniques, such as ocean alkalinity enhancement, ocean fertilization, seaweed cultivation, restoration of coastal ecosystems, and electrochemical approaches. OCB, together with the North American Carbon Program and the US Carbon Cycle Science Program, coordinate an aquatic continuum OCB NACP focus group to work with NACP and OCB program leadership to help identify community-based mechanisms such as workshops, small group efforts, publications, so on and so forth, to facilitate the exploration of and progress on high priority coastal carbon research and other high-level pertinent NACP OCB cross-cutting questions. In 2020, OCB, NACP, and the US Carbon Cycle Science Program put together a mini webinar series on extreme events such as wildfires and hurricanes. Members of this focus group also led a breakout session on extreme events at the 2021 NACP Open Science meeting. Emerging from this breakout session were several observing gaps and research questions outlined here. In 2021, the breakout session leadership submitted a proposal to the OCB activity proposal solicitation for a workshop to bring together scientists working in different parts of the aquatic continuum and in different extreme event impacted areas, such as fires, large storms, hurricanes, etc., to accelerate research in this field. OCB received many excellent proposals in this year's solicitation. And here you see activities which will take place in 2022. All right, so I think we're with what we've shared with you. If there's anything that other colleagues from the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group or NACP or OCB would like to share, let's do Q&As and discussions now.
I think everybody should have the ability to unmute themselves, but if you're feeling extra shy, you could just also chat, put something in the chat.
Any colleagues from the agencies would like to speak up, say, share any more updates or thoughts for the future? Hey, Robin.
Hi there. I have no updates, but thanks for the great presentation.
Thanks, Robin. And if anyone from the audience has questions or comments or suggestions for us, this is your time to speak up. You can also use the chat function.
It's also the end of the day. Right?
Yeah.
I do appreciate all the East Coast folks calling in for later. So
I guess I can keep going, but I'm looking at these list of workshops that are receiving new funding from OCB for this coming year. It's pretty exciting.
well, and I think one of the things that probably we haven't talked enough about, but in part because it's been definitely waylaid by the pandemic, but that we are particularly interested in finding ways to connect up people to do this kind of broader and integrative work that is beyond individual research projects. And so I'm glad that Heather included that information, for example, about the aquatic continuum, but Gammy and Heather and I are always really sort of open to ideas from the community about ways in which we might be able to, say, organize a workshop or some other way to address or identify issues that topics that people feel as though are perhaps underrepresented or need more focus and that kind of thing. And while we don't have kind of huge pots of money sitting around for that kind of thing, there are some resources that we either have access to or potentially have access to. So, I think that that's an important thing. I see there is a question.
Yes.
How does data and data interfaces come into play in these activities? That's a great question. I'm not sure. I forgot to mention that I'll talk from the NACP perspective at least. So I forgot to mention that NACP is guided by what is called the Scientific Leadership Group, which is a committee of people who span a range of different disciplines who have agreed to serve the community in this way, and they meet quarterly and talk about different important issues at hand. And one of them that we do talk about pretty frequently is the sort of difficulties about making sure that all research projects and endeavors have access to appropriate data repositories to be able to facilitate easy data access to research results. A big chunk of NACP participants are NASA funded, and so those automatically have access to NASA Distributed Active Archive Centers, or DACs. So there's a big sort of skew in that, but we have pretty actively recognized that that's not true for everybody. I know that NSF has been really working hard on addressing these issues too, about that many agencies have this requirement now, obviously, for the data to be put into some appropriate archive and not just have the researcher say, well, people can contact me if they want it. But one of the things that the Science Leadership Group has talked about with the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group, which is the program managers, is about the better ways to sort of figure out how to do sort of cross-agency coordination around that. So I think that that's the kind of perspective, I don't know if Gami has more to add from from her sort of point of view.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a very good overview. But I know Kathy is an expert in this. So I mean, we'd love to hear from you. What are your suggestions? And I think
yeah. So what your goals are very broad and integrative and sort of synthesizing the state of the art, and you want support, you want that to be data supported and sort of data relevant. And I guess thinking almost anticipating future next generation problems. Let's assume that everyone has access to all of the data archives that they could ever want. What are the next informatics tools that need to be stood up to start linking those data together and start cross-talking those data? Because that's actually a different question than how do we discover and how do we access data, which is totally reasonable to be focusing on first. And that definitely is a high priority and a very relevant question. But sort of coalescing multiple stakeholders, both within science and across policy, about how do we talk about the processes that are involved in these sciences, and then how do we talk about the data and link that to those processes? And it starts sounding a little bit modeling-esque, and maybe that's my own personal background coming through. But even without thinking about that as a process model linkage, just how do those terms interrelate, and how can we annotate these data sets so that we can place the data in the context of this broader sort of process question, policy relevant question?
That's excellent. Actually, those are the questions we need. Thank you for sharing, Kathy. And if you'd like to email me and Libby, like these thoughts and anything that you want to expand upon, please feel free to do that.
I have a note down to email you right now.
Yeah, please do that. And related to what Libby mentioned, the science leadership group, there's an open nomination process, and anyone can self-nominate. So please, I mean, Libby can say more. But the other way is like, I think most of you know us and know members, different program managers from the agencies. And then we also have some new program managers. Some of them are here, like Robin, and I think Julie was here too. And then you have the old ones like Monica. She's not old, but she's been there for a long time, 11 years or so. So I mean, you can reach out to any of us. But if you reach out to me or Libby, then we can help to sort of spread the message among the carbon cycle interagency working group and other colleagues who should hear about this.
I just want to clarify. So when we need new members, we do have an open nomination process, but it's not at any time somebody can nominate themselves to be part of the science leadership group. And then the other part is that that the leadership group meetings are open, and often especially in the past, the SLG has invited people to come and give a presentation and engage in some discussion and planning. So there is a way to kind of participate without having to say, well, I'm going to volunteer for a 3-year term.
I was going to mention that I'm pre-tenure, and right. So I don't know if I will for this cycle, but that does sound like a really really important position, and yes. Yeah,
and since we're also preparing. So Libby, I don't know if you mentioned, but at some point, the new decadal NACP science implementation plan will be released, right? And so it's being finalized. But soon after that, we'll start work on the new US carbon cycle science plan. And I think talking about data and all the thoughts that you shared in that plan will be very important. So I appreciate any feedback.
I neglected to mention that there is in the implementation plan a section on data that was primarily written by Yaxing Wei, who is also on the science leadership group, and he's at ORNL DAC. But I think there's lots of room for even expanded conversation both within NACP and I'm sure also, with OCB and in conjunction with US Carbon Cycle Science program, as Gammy was saying.
Yeah, and I think a few years ago we had sponsored a big soils workshop, and Kathy was very closely involved, and it generated a number of publications. And I think and I hope I think I'm seeing a lot of products coming up that are related to what was discussed back then. And I hope we can do something similar in the near future. So we welcome any ideas and any collaborations. I mean, we cannot do any of these things alone.
I think some of the challenges from an academic perspective is I haven't quite cracked the nut of how to do informatics and ontology development from my particular position in academia. I'm still, it still feels like a very low publication return for value. So trying to get this maybe situated a little bit more in the policy sphere or in the governmental sphere might make some sense. Don't know yet. Still
yeah, I
kicking
mean,
that one around.
I could think of something like this as an important perspective publication, not policy prescriptive, but policy informing publication, which might count towards a,
What I'm thinking of though, for like the exact semantic resource that would be needed to accomplish this, that type of cyber infrastructure. If somebody who's listening to this can tell me that I'm wrong and here's the way to publish it and here's the way to get academic credit for it, fantastic. But I haven't quite figured that out yet. So yes,
It's worth giving some thought to. I'm going to turn my wheels on that one.
All right. Well, when you come up with a brilliant solution, let me know.
So, and I think Claire was talking about the NCBR workshop. Part of the Interagency CBR workstream activity, we had endorsed a proposal on NCBR submitted to OCB, and that's a workshop proposal that was recently approved. And so Claire is welcoming ideas on the best ways to include DEI goals. And so Jessica Cross is the lead. I don't know if Claire is still there. If you'd like to say anything, Claire, on this, but we're very excited.
Yeah, and we only recently found out that we were approved for the workshop and working group. And the main ideas are to focus on the most promising marine carbon dioxide removal approaches, not to rehash everything that's been suggested, but to focus on what might be meaningful and what kind of experiments we would think the community should pursue soon. And so more to come on that.
Thank you. And I think since Claire mentioned DEI, we're also very excited about the first NACP DEI report, which is based on a survey that was disseminated a few months ago. I hope it's useful for everyone.
Could you say again what report that is?
So it hasn't been published yet. We've been working on it, but last winter we did, at the beginning of 2021, we did a diversity assessment survey to the NACP community that was, and we're writing, that asked a whole bunch of different sort of demographic and career stage and questions, as well as, questions about experiences and ideas around DEIA issues. And so that report is nearing completion and will be shared soon. And actually, I keep meaning to ask Heather about this. We did that because Heather had implemented something very similar initially for the OCB community, and I think it could be really interesting to compare some notes and learn a little bit more about if there are some similarities and differences between the types of things that the feedback that they got and that we got.
So for those of us who are still with us, do you have any other thoughts? Anything you'd like to share? And while you're thinking, maybe we should like wrap up maybe within 5 minutes, maybe, so we can like.
If nobody has more to share, I think that's okay.
We can give a few seconds for people to think about things to say if they'd like.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, each of our programs have a website, and there are ways to reach out to us, and there are ways to follow our social media accounts also. And you can subscribe to the newsletters. You can email us anytime. If you have thoughts that you would like to share with us or our colleagues, the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group, the Science Leadership Group, or anyone involved in everything we're doing, please reach out to us anytime. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gabby and Libby. Have a good
Thank
night.
you, Monica. Thank you. Thanks, John. Oh, Herman Scott has a good question.
Yes, I see that.
Can we try to answer it?
You probably can give the best answer for this than I can. Well, you go first, and then I'll talk about maybe some ways that.
Yeah, I can give a very high level answer.
Yeah.
Do I say Herman or Erman? I hope I'm not butchering your name. So as I said earlier, there is the Global Change Research Act of 1990, which sort of established the US Global Change Research Program. And under that auspice, there is under the auspices of the USCCRP, there are different interagency working groups. There is one interagency working group focused on international matters, and it's populated by program managers from different agencies who have an international portfolio. And then there are a variety of other working groups. And then there's a Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group, which focuses on carbon and which established and which leads the US Carbon Cycle Science Program. So there are federal colleagues involved with the USCCRP who are part of the COP process. And when you talk about the pledges, when those pledges are made, or when there is an implementation happening to make to commit to those pledges, then different agencies who are involved in these interagency processes are involved also. I don't know what you mean by draw a line. Do you mean the connection? So I hope this helps with the connection. So some of the same people who are informing these processes are involved in the interagency working groups, and even if they're not directly involved, they have those connections to make the work happen. Libby?
Yeah, I think that part of the sort of contribution and the side of NACP for this is that the participants in NACP are the researchers, the scientific researchers, mostly from academia, but also from federal agencies who are not the program managers, who sort of bring their understanding and the things that they see that are needed for being able to eventually make their way all the way up to that very high level COP26 pledges stuff. And so much of what happens around the pledge is so politically distilled that I think that a lot of the scientists in the NACP community are really working hard to figure out ways in which we can help produce the science that is needed to be able to not only determine what is a good pledge, but if we are actually meeting those pledges, and not just us, but thinking about capacity building for other signatories to the COP to be able to, and so that's part of what I was talking about for, say, operationalizing a carbon monitoring system. So how do you know if you're actually accomplishing what you pledge to accomplish? I think that so part of the difference of what happens for the work that that the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group does is that they are focused on what are the sort of ways in which the particular federal agencies that they represent provide some information to the current pledges that have been made, but at that very high level by the US government. And for NACP, I think the scientists that participate then are working to sort of do some more kind of bottom up sort of understanding and research about what are ways that we can provide information and maybe come up with even sort of better pledges and ways to address that in the future. So I hope that answers your question, and I hope that Gami agrees with what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree, Libby, and and 100%. And the other thing I forgot is the new work stream on interagency greenhouse gas monitoring, information, and analysis. The vision is to also help with something like that, helping with the informing and helping to implement those pledges, and helping with providing the needed science to assess how the pledges are going, how we're doing, how nations are doing. So yeah, there's a lot of interest and a lot of activity happening around this.
And of course, all the actual program managers have already signed off. So
yes,
but I think that we have a pretty good sense of what's going on that.
Any other thoughts or questions? So this has been recorded. You should be able to see the recording online. I don't know if you'll be sharing the slides too, Libby, so we can talk about that. They have not been uploaded yet.
Yeah, I submitted them this morning, but maybe also.
Oh, you did? Okay.
But I submitted an earlier version, so we might need to update them, but that's fine. So, okay.
All right. So
thanks
shall we wrap up?
Everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Reach out to us if you need. Thank you, Kay. Bye, Libby.
Bye, Gami.